federal issue, but as all things federal, it seems to come down to local, doesn't it? We end up dealing with the mess they don't fix. I hope that I can finish this in 3 minutes, but I timed the two speakers that were Paul Quadros as students, and if they kindly yield the minute that each one of them had left. If they do, thumbs up. See, we're working together right here in Pittsboro. It seems that history never seems to matter unless you're living it. Funny things in school, we all ignore it, but here we are living another historical moment. And as some people have read a thing I sent out, Mark Twain's statement that history doesn't seem to repeat itself, but it sure as heck rhymes. Now my wife and I were thinking about what that meant, and when you think about it, we're always at a place where it seems so familiar, as some of these great speakers before have pointed out. In fact, I'm proud that many of these folks that I know are my friends, and they're looking at all sides of this issue, and it really points to the fact that we need to come together and figure out how we can solve these issues by working with each other as opposed to at each other. And that's a big difference. A few of the things that were said early on by the gentleman from NC Listen, I spent a couple days with some of our leaders at the Emerging Issues Forum, and most of the things that they were talking about, that Governor Hunt and all these leaders have brought forward, have to do with transportation, issues of sprawl and growth, and how to manage a growing state that will have 4 million new North Carolinians in the next 30 years. Many of which from all over the world. And nobody was talking about sending them back home. What they were talking about is how we're going to work together to create public transportation, to create networks of communication, to create better jobs. So I would ask that gentleman, when he says that immigrants cause huge dollars in public schools and social services, to realize that most of those costs are caused by unchecked planning and by sprawl issues, not by people coming here to work jobs that most of us don't want to do, or that have already moved on, because many of us now have high school diplomas. Since 1960, half the American men dropped out of high school. Today, that's 10%. That explains one reason why we have so many people coming here to fill these jobs. I've got a couple of statistics here from an article I gave you guys from Foreign Affairs, but I hope that this illuminates a little bit on the economics. On average, people talk about what immigrants cost. According to estimates, 2/3 of illegal immigrants have income tax withheld from their paychecks, and the Social Security Administration collects some $7 billion a year that goes unclaimed, most of it thought to come from unauthorized workers. That would be on page 54 at the bottom. On page 56, and this is an article from December of 2006, in North Carolina, some of the best efforts have been made to measure the elusive immigrant growth dividend by looking at states or regions rather than the nation as a whole. Now we all know North Carolina had one of the fastest growing foreign-born populations in the country, and that we think that their contribution to economic expansion was quite great. Well, in fact, the bottom line, newcomers through 2006 filled 1/3 of the new jobs and were responsible for $9.2 billion in consumer spending, $1.9 billion in saved wages, for a total growth dividend of $11 billion at the end of 2006. Now this dwarfed the $61 million, or $102 per native-born taxpayer, that the newcomers cost the state when taxes and services were net out. And that's not related to the first numbers that I gave you. A much-cited 11-year-old estimate by the National Academy of Sciences suggests that complementarity, which is the concept that immigrants are filling jobs and doing things that we're not doing, we're all working together, could add as much as $10 billion a year to U.S. incomes. This is what Tim Kine was referring to earlier. But according to some economists, immigrants may have even more different and thus account for even a larger added income. In fact, if you look at page 58, and this is the key issue, how big is this growth dividend? Well, economists are great at saying on one hand and the other, and no one really knows, because in large part it's difficult to measure the extent and the effects of immigrant complementarity. But by doing a back of the envelope, and I know George likes to do numbers, but doing just a calculation, 8 million laborers working 2,000 hours a year at $9 an hour, an average wage based on employers' reports fired with the federal government would generate $144 billion worth of economic activity. Add the add the National Academy of Sciences concerted investment that I mentioned before, which is $10 billion, and now we're at the contribution of $154 billion. Now, for those that want to know what that means, in 2006 dollars, that was the entire gross state product of Kentucky, or 1.2% of what was then a $13 trillion U.S. economy. Now, a similar estimate of all immigrant contributions, which are legal and illegal, and I know we're talking today about undocumented workers or illegal aliens, comes to $700 billion, or about the money we gave to the bankers, or 5.4% of our gross domestic product. This, to me, is a significant amount of money that these people are bringing to our country and to our communities. And for those that would say that we should treat them without all due respect and treat the people that are least among us in our community with the best angels in mind, I think are wholly wrong. In fact, there are a couple of stories in a book I was reading, and of course, history is something again, people hate to talk about unless we get to these points. But in the 1880s in Illinois, there was a community in southern Illinois that had race problems. And they had a group of immigrants, these were Italian Americans, that had come as undocumented, who displaced Belgian and French workers in the mines. Now, they got angry when African Americans migrated up from Mississippi and a riot ensued, and they ran them out of town. They were thinking because they were white and different, they would be immune to these problems. After World War I, in 1921, when jobs became scarce and there was a Red Scare, that community was overrun by whites and driven to the river. So, the lesson to be learned is, when you mistreat others and think that this misfortune will not be visited upon you, you were wrong. So when we mistreat these people and feel that we can drive them to other places, it will only be revisited upon our children and our children's children and their children too.